The morning sun hit Eastwood Estates like a spotlight, bouncing off freshly painted fences and perfectly trimmed lawns. From the outside, it looked like the kind of neighborhood people only see in magazines. SUVs parked in pristine driveways, kids racing down the streets on bikes, sprinklers hissing in rhythm. But Jerome Hayes knew better. Beneath the surface, perfection was just a mask. Jerome stepped onto his porch, coffee in hand, taking in the quiet hum of a Sunday morning. Birds chirped, the scent of cut grass filled the air, and somewhere, a neighbor's dog barked. He exhaled slowly, feeling a rare moment of peace, until his gaze fell on his roof. His stomach sank. The panels, his solar panels, sleek, black, humming with clean energy, his pride, his investment, his way of cutting the electricity bill while helping the environment. But now they were gone. Well, not gone, covered. Thick, white paint smeared across every panel, sloppy brush strokes running like tiny rivers across the shiny black surfaces. Jerome dropped his coffee. The liquid didn't spill, but his hands trembled. He fumbled for his phone and dialed his neighbor, Marcy, who lived across the street. "Hello?" She answered, her tone casual. "Marcy, you won't believe this. Someone." Jerome's voice cracked. "I saw," she interrupted, her voice tight with suppressed laughter. Karen Whitman, HOA president, paint roller in hand, humming away like she was redecorating the Louvre. Jerome's jaw clenched. Karen Whitman, the woman whose obsession with uniformity and control over the neighborhood had caused more complaints than anyone could count. She was notorious for nitpicking fences, shrubs, mailbox designs, sometimes even how people trimmed their hedges. But this was new. "I can't believe she'd..." Jerome's sentence faltered as he noticed the faint blinking on his garage wall. The cameras, the security system, dead, all offline. "Wait, Marcy, my security system," he said, voice rising. "The panels powered, the street lights, the neighborhood cameras, all of it." Marcy's silence hung heavy. Then she muttered, almost in awe, "Jerome, the backup's down. She really did it." Jerome's blood ran cold. He hadn't just lost his energy source. Karen had inadvertently disabled the entire neighborhood's safety network, and she had no clue. A distant screech of brakes interrupted his thoughts. A neighbor shouted, "Why is the camera down?" Someone called 911. Jerome's heart pounded. This wasn't just petty HOA drama. It was a ticking time bomb. He stormed down his driveway, phone in hand. The street was starting to buzz. Neighbors spilling out of their houses, phones out, capturing the chaos. Marcy fell into step beside him. "They're coming," she said quietly. Jerome's brow furrowed. "Who?" "Security patrols. They're automatically dispatched when the system goes offline. You have, like 2 minutes before they hit the street." Jerome's jaw tightened. This wasn't a neighborhood spat anymore. It was a full-blown emergency. The smell of fresh paint hung in the air, mingling with a faint metallic tang of electrical sparks. Jerome's fists clenched. Karen hadn't just ruined property. She'd created a potential disaster. Inside her house, Karen Whitman watched through her sliding door, teacup in hand, scrolling her HOA group chat. The smug expression on her face didn't falter. She had painted over the panels to maintain an aesthetic. She had no idea the storm she'd unleashed. "Jerome's gonna have a fit," she muttered. "Good. About time someone learns that rules exist here." Back on the street, Jerome realized the cameras had captured the entire act. Digital proof existed. Timestamps, angles, evidence that couldn't be argued away. Karen's confidence was built on a false sense of control. The hum of tension was palpable. Neighbors whispered, some sympathetic, some angry, some fascinated. Jerome's hands shook, but not from fear, from anticipation. This confrontation was going to go far beyond HOA drama. A sudden shout cut through the tension. "Karen, what did you do to the panels?" Karen froze, lips pressed tight. I was just painting." Jerome's voice rose. "Painting? Do you know what you just disabled?" Karen blinked, genuinely confused. "Disabled? Everything," Jerome snapped. Street lights, cameras, security alerts. People could have been hurt. Karen's response was almost rehearsed. Well, maybe you should have followed the rules. Jerome took a deep breath. The absurdity, the danger, the sheer disregard. It was staggering. Rules don't matter when people's lives are at stake. A low hum vibrated through the neighborhood. The solar system was rerouting, stabilizing. It was slow, fragile, but it gave Jerome a window to act. He turned to the growing crowd, now forming a semicircle around the confrontation. Faces of neighbors, phones out, capturing every moment. Listen up, Jerome said, voice steadying. This isn't just about paint. This is about power, control, and knowing when enough is enough. Karen took a small step back, hands raised in mock surrender. I didn't know. You should have. Jerome cut her off. Now, we deal with the consequences. Everyone will see exactly what happens when one person thinks they own the neighborhood. In the distance, muted sirens wailed. The local police, alerted automatically by the compromised system. Jerome felt a mix of dread and grim satisfaction. Things were escalating fast. Neighbors whispered excitedly, phones live streaming the chaos. Comments scrolled, HOA gone rogue. Karen's crazy. Did she just disable the entire neighborhood? Jerome realized this fight had left the street and entered the digital world. He glanced at the horizon, sun glinting off the remaining intact panels. Symbols of hope, signs that power could be reclaimed. Jerome whispered to himself, all right, let's fix this and make sure everyone knows the truth. Tension crackled in the air, thick and electric. Every neighbor watching, every phone recording. Jerome knew whatever came next would change Eastwood Estates forever. The first act of rebellion had been painted in white, but the real storm was just beginning. Jerome stood in the middle of the street, arms crossed, watching Karen retreat toward her front door, a smug little smirk still playing on her lips. The neighborhood buzzed with tension, neighbors whispering, phones out, some filming, some just staring. But Jerome's mind was elsewhere. He needed context. He needed to understand why Karen had pushed things this far. Eastwood Estates wasn't always like this. 10 years ago, when Jerome first moved in, it was a quiet, diverse neighborhood. Families knew each other. Kids played until dusk, and the HOA existed mostly on paper. A gentle committee that made sure lawns weren't overgrown and trash bins weren't left on the street. Jerome remembered the first day he moved in vividly. He had parked his old sedan in the driveway, boxes piled high, sweat dripping down his face. Malik, his younger brother, had jumped out of the car with a grin, carrying a box of cereal. Man, this place is nice, Malik said, looking around. Looks like we're gonna fit right in. Jerome had laughed. Yeah, as long as we follow the rules. Rules. That word had carried a different weight back then. Just basic courtesy. But over the years, the HOA, led by Karen Whitman, had morphed into something else entirely. It wasn't just rules anymore. It was control, power, and anyone who deviated, intentionally or not, became a target. Jerome had seen it before. Minor infractions escalating into full-blown confrontations. A black mailbox? Fined. A colorful garden? Called unsightly. A basketball hoop left in the driveway? Complaints filed. Letters mailed. And the worst part? Karen thrived on attention. She fed off conflict, as if the more she controlled, the more important she felt. But Jerome had tried to stay under the radar. Always polite, always compliant, until he invested in solar panels. That, apparently, was a line she couldn't tolerate. Jerome's phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. A message from Malik. Bro, people are freaking out on the Eastwood app. Karen's gonna get lit up. Jerome frowned. Malik had always been the more reactionary one, but he had a point. The neighborhood's digital network was exploding. Jerome glanced at the crowd. Some neighbors were already knocking on doors, checking in on each other. Others stood frozen, unsure whether to intervene or just watch the chaos unfold. And somewhere in the middle, Jerome realized a silent war was brewing, not between him and Karen, but between Karen and the community. He turned to Marcy, who was still beside him, arms folded, "We can't just stand here," he said. "If Karen thinks she can keep doing this without consequences, it'll never stop." Marcy nodded, eyes serious. "Agreed. But we need to be smart. This isn't just paint anymore. It's evidence. Cameras. Screenshots. We need a strategy." Jerome clenched his jaw. Strategy. He had won. But it wasn't going to be easy. Karen was unpredictable, aggressive when cornered, and had the HOA board backing her blindly. She thrived on escalation, and he couldn't just play by her rules anymore. "First," Jerome said, "we document everything. Every brush stroke, every comment, every video. This is proof she's endangering the neighborhood." Marcy nodded. "Got it. What next?" Jerome took a deep breath. "Next, we confront her, face to face, calmly, but with authority. She needs to understand this isn't a petty HOA dispute. This is about people's lives." As he spoke, Karen emerged from her front door again, this time holding a clipboard like a shield. "I don't appreciate being surrounded," she said, voice sharp. "I'm just enforcing the rules. You all act like I've done something criminal." Jerome stepped forward. "Karen, you painted over solar panels. Not just mine, but the entire neighborhood's network. Street lights, cameras, security systems. They're offline because of you. People could have been hurt." Karen's face flushed with indignation. "Well, maybe you should have installed them somewhere else. The HOA rules are clear. Roofs must maintain uniform appearance. You ignored that." Jerome shook his head in disbelief. "You're missing the point. Rules don't matter when people's safety is at risk." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some neighbors stepped closer, phones out, documenting the confrontation. The tension in the air was palpable. Jerome could feel the weight of every gaze, every whispered word. Karen's hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from frustration. "You think I want to cause trouble? I'm just maintaining order. You're all overreacting." Jerome's voice grew calm, but firm. "Order at the expense of safety isn't order. It's control. And it ends now." Suddenly, a sharp beep echoed from Jerome's garage. The solar system's backup kicked in, stabilizing power to the neighborhood cameras and streetlights. The hum of electricity returned, a subtle but powerful reminder that Jerome had the upper hand. Karen blinked, eyes widening as the cameras lit up, capturing her in high definition. Jerome motioned toward the recording devices. "Everything's documented, Karen. Every act, every step. The neighborhood, law enforcement, even social media. This isn't going away." Karen's mouth opened, then closed. She looked around, realizing the crowd wasn't intimidated. She had underestimated the community's awareness, their unity. Jerome could see the moment she processed it, the realization that power wasn't hers to wield unilaterally. Marcy leaned closer to Jerome. "We need to call the HOA board. They need to see this." Jerome nodded. "Yes, and we'll do it publicly. Transparency is our ally." Karen finally took a step back, gripping her clipboard like a lifeline. "You'll regret this. The board will back me. You'll see." Jerome smiled faintly, not out of arrogance, but calm confidence. "Maybe, but what happens next isn't about revenge. It's about justice, and everyone watching knows it." The first confrontation had ended, but the war was just beginning. Jerome knew Karen wouldn't back down quietly, and neither would he. Eastwood Estates had a choice: to side with control and fear, or with community and accountability. Jerome glanced at the neighborhood around him. The kids, the parents, the elderly, all watching and recording, witnessing the moment. He realized something. This wasn't just about solar panels. It was about empowerment, about standing up when authority crosses the line, about showing that justice isn't a rule on paper, it's action in the real world. And Jerome was ready. The hum of restored electricity hummed faintly through Eastwood Estates, but the tension on the street was electric in another sense. Sharp, brittle, impossible to ignore. Jerome stood near his driveway, arms folded, eyes scanning the faces of neighbors who were still murmuring, phones out, capturing every second of the confrontation. Karen Whitman had retreated slightly, clipboard clutched like a shield, but Jerome knew this was far from over. He felt a tap on his shoulder. Jerome, Marcy whispered, her expression grave. The HOA board just got a call, and so did the police. They're on their way. Jerome nodded, feeling the weight of what was coming. Karen had finally crossed a line too big to ignore. The neighborhood had witnessed an act that wasn't just petty vandalism. It was an endangerment of property, safety, and trust. And now, the higher powers were getting involved. Within minutes, two black SUVs rolled slowly down the cul-de-sac, followed by a marked police cruiser. Officers stepped out, hands resting casually on their belts, surveying the street. Their faces were polite but cautious, aware that they were entering a simmering conflict. "Good morning, everyone," one of the officers called out. "We've been notified about a dispute regarding property and HOA regulations. Let's start by identifying all involved parties." Jerome stepped forward immediately. "Officer, I'm Jerome Hayes. This HOA member, Karen Whitman, painted over my solar panels. They power the neighborhood security and street systems. People could have been hurt." Karen, ever defensive, spoke quickly. "Officer, I was just enforcing HOA rules. It's about uniformity, aesthetics, rules that are clearly posted." Jerome's jaw tightened. "Rules don't matter when lives are at stake. The panels weren't just mine. They support the neighborhood's security network. That's why this is an emergency, not just a dispute over paint." The officer, a tall man with close-cropped hair, raised an eyebrow. "I see. We'll need to document everything. Can you show us the damage?" Jerome led them toward his driveway. Thick, streaky white paint covered each solar panel, dripping toward the edges like frozen rain. The faint smell of fresh paint lingered in the warm air. Neighbors pressed in closer, phones filming, faces tense with anticipation. Karen rolled her eyes. "It's just paint. You're making it sound like a catastrophe." Jerome shot her a look that silenced her. "It is a catastrophe when the entire neighborhood is left vulnerable because of your obsession with control." The officer gestured for his partner to take photos and video of the panels and the surrounding area. "All right, Ms. Whitman, we'll need your statement as well," he said calmly. "From what we're seeing, this could escalate beyond HOA jurisdiction." Karen's face drained of color, though she tried to maintain her composure. Jerome could see the panic flicker in her eyes. Suddenly, the rules she thought protected her were powerless. As the officers took notes, another figure emerged from the street corner. Douglas Abrams, the HOA board president. Unlike Karen, he was older, deliberate, and calculated. He carried a leather binder and looked at the scene with a mixture of disbelief and concern. "Douglas," Jerome called, "this is what happens when HOA rules override safety." The panels were vital to the neighborhood system, and Karen acted unilaterally. Douglas adjusted his glasses. "Jerome, I understand your frustration, but the HOA exists to maintain property values, aesthetics, and order." Karen, well, she took initiative where she thought it was needed. Jerome's voice rose, carrying across the street. "Initiative? Initiative that compromises everyone's safety isn't initiative. It's negligence. Look at what's happening. Cameras offline, street lights flickering, neighbors panicked." Douglas held up a hand, his expression neutral but firm. "We'll review everything, Jerome, but escalating publicly like this, it complicates matters. We can mediate, but tempers need to cool." Marcy muttered under her breath, audible only to Jerome. "Mediating won't fix the system that's just been compromised." Jerome clenched his fists, understanding she was right. The HOA's slow bureaucratic process wouldn't undo the immediate danger Karen had caused. But worse, it seemed some of the authority figures themselves were siding, albeit passively, with Karen's desire for control. As he turned back to his house, Jerome noticed movement from across the street. Neighbors were talking amongst themselves, their voices rising. Some were defending Karen, claiming she had a right to enforce HOA rules. Others were furious, expressing outrage that someone had the audacity to interfere with essential systems. Jerome realized something important. This wasn't just about him anymore. It had become a neighborhood-wide reckoning, a test of community power versus authoritarian HOA control. And social media was already lighting up. Within minutes, live streams of the confrontation had hundreds of viewers from neighboring districts. Comments scrolled. "HOA Karen gone too far." This is insane. Community power is the only solution. Karen, sensing the tide turning, tried to raise her voice. Everyone, calm down. I am enforcing the rules. Without rules, there's chaos. Jerome stepped closer, his tone measured but firm. No, Karen. What you call rules is control. And when control risks the safety and dignity of people, it becomes tyranny. Douglas Abrams sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the rising tension. Jerome, perhaps a compromise? Could the panels be repainted elsewhere? Or some temporary solution applied? Jerome shook his head. Compromise isn't enough. You don't get to put the community at risk and call it aesthetic management. The trust has been broken. Accountability is required. Meanwhile, Karen's phone buzzed repeatedly. She ignored it at first, then glanced down. HOA group messages, angry neighbors, and social media alerts, all documenting her actions. Her smug expression faltered. The digital trail she had ignored was now her greatest liability. Jerome noticed the change instantly. She was no longer in control. The neighborhood, the police, the cameras, even the digital world, everything was watching her. Her power, rooted in intimidation and bureaucratic rules, was crumbling in real time. Marcy leaned close to Jerome. Now's the time to act strategically. The officers are on site. The HOA board is watching, and the neighborhood is united. We can leverage this, but carefully. Jerome nodded. He could feel the momentum shifting. For years, Karen had ruled Eastwood Estates with subtle authoritarianism, keeping neighbors afraid to speak up. But now, exposed and vulnerable, she was on the defensive, and Jerome knew exactly what to do next. It wouldn't be easy. Karen would resist. The HOA bureaucracy would push back. But for the first time, the scales were tipping in favor of accountability. In the eyes of the community, Jerome wasn't just a neighbor with painted panels. He was the catalyst for change. The officer cleared his throat. Jerome, Ems Whitman, Douglas. We'll document everything and file a report. Until then, please maintain distance and avoid escalation. Jerome took a deep breath. Officer, this isn't over. Karen's actions have consequences, and the neighborhood deserves transparency. Karen's eyes narrowed, but she knew the cameras, the crowd, and the authorities had shifted the balance. She was exposed. Jerome looked around at the people filming, whispering, and witnessing. He realized the power of the moment. This was bigger than him. It was about community, about justice, and about making sure one person's obsession with control couldn't endanger everyone else. And Jerome knew the real fight was only just beginning. The sun had climbed higher over Eastwood Estates, casting sharp shadows across the manicured lawns. The air buzzed with tension, not just from the summer heat, but from the storm brewing in the streets. Jerome stood near his driveway, arms folded, eyes scanning the faces of neighbors who had gathered like spectators to a slow-motion disaster. Every phone pointed at the confrontation, every whisper a rumor, every glare a judgment. But Jerome's mind was sharp, calculating. This moment, the turning point, was finally here. And then it happened. A loud rumble echoed from down the street. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't a vehicle. The sound was mechanical, methodical, growing louder with every second. Jerome's brow furrowed. From around the corner, a large utility truck rolled into view, emblazoned with the local power company's logo. Crew members jumped out, tools in hand, speaking into radios. Jerome's stomach tightened. What are they doing here? He muttered under his breath. One of the officers stepped forward, gesturing toward the crew. We received a call about a possible compromise in the neighborhood's energy and security system. The utility company is here to assess and stabilize the network. Jerome's eyes widened. This wasn't just about Karen's reckless painting anymore. The repercussions were bigger, far bigger. If the panels had been damaged enough to compromise the system, the neighborhood's electricity and surveillance were at risk, and any interruption could create chaos, even endanger lives. Karen's face blanched. She hadn't anticipated this. Her casual act of rule enforcement had triggered a professional emergency response. The smugness was gone, replaced by panic that flickered across her features. Douglas Abrams, the HOA board president, pushed his glasses up nervously. We need to document everything. Carefully. He stammered. We can't just let the situation escalate further. Jerome's eyes narrowed. He realized the first domino had fallen. Karen's unilateral action hadn't just disrupted the neighborhood. It had exposed her overreach and negligence to the authorities, the HOA board, and every neighbor present. The utility workers approached Jerome. "Sir, we need to access your panels," one of them said. "We'll stabilize the system temporarily, but there may be damage that requires permanent repairs." Jerome nodded, motioning to the white streaked panels. "Go ahead. Just be careful. These panels are essential for the neighborhood security network." As the crew began their work, Jerome turned back toward Karen. Her phone was buzzing incessantly, messages piling up from HOA members, neighbors, and even local news outlets that had caught wind of the live-streamed footage. She looked trapped, cornered by the consequences she had never considered. "You don't understand, Jerome," Karen snapped, her voice rising. "I'm enforcing the rules. Without rules, the neighborhood descends into chaos." Jerome stepped closer, calm but resolute. "Karen, rules mean nothing if they risk people's lives. You painted over the panels without thinking about the consequences. You jeopardized every single resident here. That's not enforcement. It's recklessness." A murmur ran through the crowd. Neighbors who had been silent began voicing agreement. "She's right. This is insane. Who does she think she is?" The energy shifted. Karen, once confident and commanding, now looked small, her authority crumbling under the weight of collective scrutiny. Then, another twist. A sharp chime came from Jerome's phone. He glanced down. It was a notification from the neighborhood security app. The system, even compromised, had detected unusual activity. Karen's own HOA house had multiple windows unlocked and doors slightly ajar. Security cameras had been offline during her painting spree. Jerome's pulse quickened. "Marcy," he whispered, "look at this. Her house is vulnerable. All those cameras she disabled just left her exposed." Marcy's eyes widened. "You're kidding the irony." Jerome shook his head. "Not kidding. This is proof that control without accountability is dangerous. She compromised not just my panels, but the entire neighborhood's safety, including her own." Karen's panic became palpable. She fumbled with her phone, scrolling through alerts, realizing that the narrative had completely turned against her. The crowd had started taking videos and sharing them on social media. The comments were scathing, exposing her overreach. HOA Karen endangers neighborhood. Power and control gone too far. Who gave her the right? Douglas Abrams, sensing the crisis, raised a hand, trying to regain authority. "Everyone, calm down. We will conduct a full review. Karen, please." But it was too late. The tide had shifted. Jerome, once just a neighbor challenging a minor violation, had become the voice of reason, the advocate for community safety and empowerment. And Karen was exposed, trapped by the evidence and the collective judgment of everyone around her. Then, Jerome made a decision. He raised his voice, addressing the crowd. "This isn't just about me, or the panels, or even Karen. This is about accountability, dignity, and respect. If one person can put everyone at risk for the sake of control, what does that say about the rules we live by?" Today, we're not just reclaiming our safety, we're reclaiming our power as a community. The neighbors nodded, murmurs of agreement swelling into cheers. Even some of Karen's allies shifted uncomfortably, realizing the scale of her misjudgment. Karen's face fell. She had miscalculated. She had assumed rules and authority were enough to shield her. She hadn't accounted for the human factor. The neighbors who cared, who were vigilant, who refused to be silenced. The utility workers finished their temporary stabilization. Street lights flickered back to life. Cameras blinked on, and a soft hum of electricity filled the air. Jerome watched, feeling a small surge of relief. The immediate danger was neutralized, but the repercussions for Karen were far from over. He turned back to her, voice calm but firm. "Karen, this is a turning point. Your actions have consequences. And today, everyone has seen them. How you handle this next will define your role in this neighborhood, if you still have one." Karen said nothing. Her lips pressed into a thin line, eyes darting from the cameras to the crowd, to the flashing phones capturing every moment. For the first time, she understood she was not in control. Jerome had not just defended his home. He had exposed the fragility of her power, the danger of unchecked authority. And in that moment, Jerome realized something crucial. This wasn't just a neighborhood fight. It was a microcosm of larger battles. Power versus accountability, authority versus community, fear versus empowerment. And he was at the center of it, guiding the community toward justice. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, whispering, filming, sharing, Jerome felt the weight of the day settle on his shoulders. Karen would have to answer for her actions. The HOA board would have to act, and the neighborhood would have to reckon with the lessons learned. But Jerome also knew this. The story was far from over. The confrontation had reached a major turning point. But the climax, the moment where justice, accountability, and empowerment collided, was still ahead. The evening sun cast long shadows across Eastwood Estates, turning the manicured lawns golden and giving the street a surreal, almost cinematic quality. Jerome stood near the corner of his driveway, phone in hand, scrolling through footage that neighbors had captured earlier. Clips of Karen painting over his solar panels, moments of confrontation, and shaky videos of the utility crew stabilizing the neighborhood systems filled the screen. Every video, every comment, every notification told the same story. The community was awake, alert, and angry. Jerome felt a rush of responsibility. This wasn't just his fight anymore. It was theirs too. And if he wanted justice, if he wanted accountability, he had to organize carefully. Marcy appeared beside him, carrying a binder stuffed with notes and screenshots. "Jerome, we need a plan," she said, her voice low but urgent. "Karen thinks she can intimidate, but the community is watching now. We need to turn that attention into leverage." Jerome nodded. "Exactly. First, we document everything. Screenshots, videos, timestamps, everything Karen did, and everything she tries to do next. Transparency is our weapon." Marcy's eyes flicked toward Karen's house. She's inside, probably thinking she's winning by staying quiet, but that's not going to help her. Jerome exhaled, feeling the tension coil in his shoulders. He knew Karen wouldn't just quietly accept scrutiny. She thrived on escalation, on confrontation. And the moment she felt cornered, she became unpredictable. "All right," Jerome said. "Step 2, mobilize the neighbors. We need statements, testimonies, evidence of her past actions. Everything that proves this isn't just a one-time thing. It's a pattern." Marcy nodded. "I've already started. A few neighbors have reached out, and they're willing to speak up." Jerome glanced down the street. Lights flickered from windows as people peered out, phones in hand. The community was awake, alert, and ready to engage. This was a rare moment where the balance of power had shifted. Karen's rules didn't matter anymore. Community action did. Jerome's phone buzzed. It was Malik. "Bro, just saw Karen talking to someone on video call. Looks like she's rallying her allies. Things are about to get messy." Jerome frowned. "She's not going to back down quietly. We need to anticipate her moves." Marcy leaned closer. "Then we plan for every contingency. Keep the focus on facts, safety, and accountability. If she tries intimidation again, we're ready." Jerome took a deep breath. He knew the confrontation wasn't going to be just verbal. Karen had shown she was willing to disrupt safety and manipulate rules. She would escalate. The community needed a strategy to counteract that without descending into chaos. He began walking down the street, speaking to neighbors who were still lingering. "We need everyone to stay calm, but engaged. Document everything. Share videos, statements, photos. Keep the focus on facts, not opinions." A middle-aged man from across the street, Mr. Reynolds, nodded. "Jerome, I've seen Karen bully people before. It's about time someone stands up. We'll back you." Jerome felt a surge of determination. "Good. The more united we are, the less room she has to manipulate the narrative." By nightfall, the neighborhood had transformed. Porches were lit, phones recording, and small groups huddled in whispered discussions. The hum of electric backup systems filled the air, and the subtle sound of conversation buzzed like static. Jerome moved from group to group, listening, encouraging, strategizing. Then came the first counter move. Karen stepped outside, clipboard in hand, addressing the crowd. Everyone, calm down. I'm acting in the best interest of the neighborhood. The HOA rules exist to protect property values and ensure order. Jerome stepped forward, calm but authoritative. Karen, the rules mean nothing if they endanger people. Your actions disrupted the security network. That's not order. That's recklessness. Karen's eyes narrowed, lips pressed into a thin line. You think you're the authority here? You're just one neighbor. Jerome's voice carried across the street. I'm not the authority. The community is. And today, the community has spoken. We will not tolerate unilateral decisions that risk safety and dignity. A cheer went up from the neighbors. Karen's allies whispered nervously, realizing the tide was turning. She had underestimated the power of collective action. Jerome turned to Marcy. Step 3. Escalation readiness. We need to anticipate her next moves. If she tries legal threats, we have documentation. If she tries intimidation, we remain calm and focused. If she tries media manipulation, we go public first. Marcy nodded, impressed by Jerome's foresight. You're thinking 10 steps ahead. That's why people are rallying behind you. But the tension wasn't just between Jerome and Karen. It was within the community as well. Some neighbors feared retaliation. Some doubted the strategy. And others questioned whether the HOA rules could protect Karen legally. Jerome knew that to succeed, he had to unite them. He raised his voice slightly. Everyone here has seen what happened. Everyone here knows the truth. Stick together. Support each other. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. And justice requires unity. A young mother, standing near her porch, spoke up. Jerome's right. We can't let one person endanger all of us and think they're untouchable. We need to act together. The crowd murmured agreement. Phones still recording. Lights casting shadows. The sense of a community coming together was tangible. Jerome could feel it in his chest, a mix of adrenaline, responsibility, and hope. Meanwhile, Karen retreated again, slipping inside her house. But Jerome knew she was planning her next move. She wouldn't give up easily. That much was clear from her history and her personality. Jerome turned back to the crowd. Tonight, we organize. Tomorrow, we present our evidence to the HOA board, the authorities, and the neighborhood at large. Karen needs to understand that actions have consequences, and that accountability is non-negotiable. Marcy smiled faintly. You're turning a crisis into empowerment. People are seeing that. Jerome nodded. Exactly. This is bigger than me. This is about community strength, about standing up against reckless authority. And when we act, we do it with facts, with calm, with dignity. That's how we win. By the time night fully settled over Eastwood Estates, the neighborhood had transformed. It wasn't just a collection of houses anymore. It was a unified front, a living statement that no one person could dictate safety and justice for everyone. The lights flickered softly as the backup system hummed steadily, the faint glow from cameras reassuring everyone that their vigilance mattered. Jerome stood at the center of it all, feeling the enormity of the moment. The confrontation was building, alliances were forming, and the stage was set for a showdown. Karen Whitman had sparked a storm, but Jerome and the community were ready to harness it. And Jerome knew one thing for certain. When the final confrontation came, they would not falter. They would stand together. They would demand accountability, and they would make sure justice prevailed. The morning sun barely broke through the clouds, casting a pale gray light over Eastwood Estates. The streets were unusually quiet, but underneath that stillness, tension hummed like electricity. Jerome stood at the center of the neighborhood cul-de-sac, flanked by neighbors, Marcy by his side, phones recording, cameras rolling. Every eye was on Karen Whitman, who had stepped outside her house, clipboard trembling in her hands. This was it. The moment the long buildup had been leading to. Karen tried to mask her panic with authority. Everyone, please, calm down. The HOA rules are in place for order. Jerome raised a hand, cutting her off. Karen, enough. The rules don't protect lives. You jeopardized our neighborhood's safety. Today, It ends. We're here to hold you accountable. The neighbors murmured, a wave of support and determination rolling through the crowd. Some had taken photos and videos overnight. Others had collected testimonies of Karen's previous overreach, mailbox fines, yard complaints, intimidation of families. Every piece of evidence, every whisper of injustice was converging in this moment. Karen's face flushed, eyes darting nervously. She wasn't used to being challenged. Not like this. Not with a community united against her. You don't understand. I'm just doing my job. Protecting property values. Jerome took a deliberate step forward. Protecting property values doesn't give you the right to endanger lives. You painted over the solar panels, disabled the security system, and left everyone vulnerable. That's negligence. That's abuse of power. Karen's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She realized she was surrounded, exposed. Her digital and physical actions documented for all to see. Her allies had stayed inside, hesitant, unsure. She was isolated, powerless. Marcy, sensing the opportunity, stepped closer to Jerome. Now, we present the evidence, she whispered. Jerome nodded. He pulled up his phone, projecting the images, videos, and statements onto a portable screen he had borrowed from a neighbor. Every eye in the street focused. Every piece of documentation told the same story. Karen's obsessive enforcement of HOA rules, her unilateral decisions, and the dangerous consequences of her actions. Jerome's voice carried across the cul-de-sac, calm but firm. Neighbors, look at this. This isn't just about paint. This is about accountability, about safety, about the principle that one person cannot control the lives of an entire community without consequences. The crowd murmured, nodding, some whispering, others holding their phones higher to capture every word. Karen's face paled. She had underestimated the power of collective action, the evidence against her, and the resolve of the people she thought she ruled. Douglas Abrams, the HOA board president, emerged from his house, binder in hand, his face a mix of concern and uncertainty. Jerome, Karen, let's calm down and review this carefully. There's no need for hostility. Jerome shook his head. Douglas, calm isn't enough anymore. Karen's actions were reckless. The neighborhood needs accountability, and today, we demonstrated. Karen tried one last maneuver, raising her voice, trying to appeal to the remaining undecided neighbors. You don't understand. Rules exist for your protection. If we ignore them, chaos follows. A neighbor, Mr. Reynolds, stepped forward, voice clear. No, Karen. Chaos happens when one person thinks they can control everyone else. You endangered all of us for the sake of rules. That's not protection. It's tyranny. The words hung in the air like a hammer striking steel. The crowd murmured in agreement. Karen's voice faltered, her authority crumbling under the weight of truth, evidence, and collective judgment. Jerome took a deep breath, feeling the moment's gravity. This wasn't just about confrontation. It was about empowerment, about reclaiming control from someone who abused it. He gestured to the screen displaying Karen's actions. Look at this. Every complaint, every fine, every act of intimidation. It all points to the same thing. Unchecked authority without accountability. Karen's face twisted, frustration and panic mingling. She tried to step forward, clipboard in hand, but Jerome held up a hand. Stay where you are. You've had your chance to explain. Now it's time for action. At that moment, a soft hum came from the street lights. The solar panels backup system. They had been restored, stabilizing the neighborhood's security network. The hum was subtle, but symbolic. Power returning to the people. Control reclaimed by the community. Jerome's voice rose, commanding, resonant. Karen Whitman, your actions have consequences. You cannot simply wield power without responsibility. The neighborhood, the authorities, and your own HOA board will hold you accountable. Karen's lips parted, then closed. She looked around, the crowd's unity staring her down. The cameras, both official and personal, recorded every expression, every hesitation. She realized she could no longer manipulate perception. The truth was undeniable. Douglas Abrams finally spoke, voice calm, but decisive. Karen, based on the evidence presented, your actions violated HOA policies and compromised neighborhood safety. The board will take immediate measures to review and rectify the situation. You may be removed from decision-making responsibilities until this is resolved. Karen's mouth fell open. She had anticipated minor pushback, perhaps a mild reprimand, but not public exposure, not immediate accountability, not the collapse of her authority in front of the entire neighborhood. Jerome stepped forward, voice measured. This isn't personal, Karen. This is about justice, community, and safety. Let today be a lesson. Rules are meaningless without accountability, and power cannot exist without responsibility. The crowd erupted into murmurs of approval, some clapping quietly, others filming, all bearing witness. Karen's shoulders slumped. For the first time, she was silent, powerless, exposed. Jerome felt a rush of relief, tempered by awareness. This was the climax, the moment the battle for justice had reached its peak. But he also knew the aftermath, the accountability, the repair, the ongoing vigilance was just beginning. He turned to the neighbors, voice calm but commanding. This is a victory, not just for one person, but for all of us, for safety, for empowerment, for dignity. Let this be a reminder that we are stronger together, and that accountability is non-negotiable. The crowd cheered softly, voices filled with affirmation. The tension, thick and suffocating for days, finally began to dissipate. Karen Whitman had been confronted, exposed, and held accountable in front of everyone she had underestimated. Jerome looked around at the faces of his neighbors, the young, the old, families, friends, all recording, all witnessing, all united. In that moment, he understood the true power of community, of standing up for justice, and of taking control when it matters most. And as the sun broke through a gap in the clouds, illuminating the street with a warm glow, Jerome knew the real work had only begun. The climax had arrived. Justice had been asserted, and the community would never forget this day. The air in Eastwood Estates felt different the morning after the showdown. It was heavier, charged with the aftershocks of confrontation, yet lighter with the relief that justice had, at least for now, prevailed. Jerome walked slowly down the street, greeting neighbors who were cautiously optimistic. The tension had not vanished entirely. It lingered like a shadow, but the atmosphere had shifted. The community had been awakened, and Karen Whitman's authority had been irreversibly shaken. Marcy walked beside him, arms crossed, scanning the street. It's amazing how quickly things turned, she said softly. One moment, she was in control. The next, she's exposed. Jerome nodded. It's the power of unity. When people see truth and evidence, it can't be ignored. But this is just the start. The fallout will be messy. Karen's house was quiet. She hadn't left since the confrontation, and the blinds were drawn, shielding her from both the sun and the judgment of neighbors. Word had spread through the HOA. Her actions would be reviewed, her authority suspended, and a formal investigation was underway. Some residents were relieved. Others were still apprehensive, wondering what new tactics Karen might attempt behind closed doors. Jerome stopped by Mr. Reynolds' porch. "Morning," he said. "How's everyone holding up?" Mr. Reynolds rubbed his forehead. Exhaustion etched on his face. "Morning, Jerome. Honestly, I'm still processing it. Karen's gone too far, but seeing you stand up, seeing the community come together, it's inspiring. People are talking, not just about her actions, but about what we can do to prevent this from happening again." Jerome smiled faintly. "Exactly. This isn't just about one conflict. It's about creating a precedent, a neighborhood that protects itself, that demands accountability." Down the street, a group of neighbors gathered, whispering and sharing footage. Smartphones displayed videos from the previous day. Karen painting the panels, the confrontation, the utility crew restoring power, Jerome addressing the crowd. It was a digital record, impossible to ignore. Comments scrolled rapidly on neighborhood forums. Finally, someone stood up to HOA Karen. "This is what accountability looks like. Jerome, you're a hero." Jerome felt a mixture of pride and responsibility. Pride for the victory, yes, but responsibility for the continued vigilance. He knew Karen wouldn't disappear quietly. She was smart, calculating, and deeply invested in maintaining control. Her next moves could take many forms: legal threats, complaints to the board, attempts to manipulate neighbors, or subtle acts of retaliation. Marcy nudged him. "Look, Jerome, people are rallying behind you. They trust you. That gives us leverage to establish neighborhood guidelines, ensure transparency, and prevent another incident like this." Jerome nodded. "Agreed. But we need to approach it strategically. The HOA can't be ignored. They still hold administrative power. We have to work with them while holding them accountable, making sure the community's voice is heard." Meanwhile, the first signs of Karen's retaliation had begun. Her social media accounts were active, posting defensive statements, trying to spin the story. HOA rules are necessary. One individual is exaggerating minor events for attention. Safety remains a priority. Jerome scanned the posts. He knew the truth was on his side, but he also understood the importance of narrative. "Marcy, we need to counteract misinformation without escalating conflict. Facts first, emotions second. Let's post screenshots of the panels, utility reports, and statements from neighbors. Transparency is our strongest weapon." Marcy pulled out her phone. "Already on it. We'll focus on clear, concise evidence. No insults, no attacks, just truth." As the day wore on, neighbors began taking small actions to solidify their community presence. Street cameras were repositioned, solar panels checked, and neighborhood meetings were scheduled to discuss protocols for safety and accountability. Jerome walked among them, offering guidance, answering questions, and providing reassurance. One young mother approached him, holding her daughter's hand. "Jerome, thank you. I was scared yesterday. Karen could have caused serious harm, but you showed us that standing up is possible, that we have a voice." Jerome knelt to meet her daughter's eyes. "It's not just me. It's everyone here. When we act together, we protect each other. That's how we keep our neighborhood safe." Across the street, Karen finally stepped outside, cautiously, as if testing the waters. Her movements were tentative, shoulders hunched, face pale. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, scanning the street nervously. For the first time, she was aware that the entire community was watching her, not just judging, but empowered to act against her if necessary. Jerome noticed her presence and nodded slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, not antagonism. "Karen," he called out, voice steady, "your actions have consequences. Cooperate with the investigation. Be transparent. That's the first step to regaining trust, if you still have a chance." Karen's lips pressed together. She didn't respond, just retreated indoors again. Jerome understood. Pride and ego had been stripped away in the face of collective accountability. The confrontation had forced her to recognize the power of the community. Later that evening, neighbors gathered at a small impromptu meeting at the cul-de-sac. Jerome stood in front of them, Marcy beside him, addressing the group. "Today, we saw what happens when authority is abused, but we also saw what's possible when a community unites. Moving forward, we need clear guidelines, transparent communication, and mutual accountability. This is our neighborhood, and we will protect it together." The group nodded in agreement. Voices rose in conversation, ideas forming. A neighborhood safety committee, regular audits of communal systems, digital transparency boards, and community meetings where everyone's voice mattered. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt cohesive, empowered, and heard. Jerome felt a wave of satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that the battle wasn't over. Karen's actions had sparked change, yes, but vigilance was necessary. Authority could be abused again if the community became complacent. Marcy leaned toward him. "You did more than defend the panels. You showed people that standing up is possible, that they don't have to be intimidated." Jerome exhaled. "It's bigger than me. It's about creating a precedent for safety, accountability, and empowerment. That's the real victory." As night settled over Eastwood Estates, the neighborhood was quiet but awake. Lights flickered from windows. The faint hum of the restored solar network echoed softly, and the air carried a sense of cautious optimism. Jerome walked home slowly, reflecting on the events. The climax had passed, but the ripples were still spreading. Relationships had shifted, power dynamics had changed, and the neighborhood had reclaimed its voice. In the quiet of his living room, Jerome reviewed footage from the confrontation one last time. Each clip, each testimony, each image was a reminder of the responsibility they now held. Karen Whitman had been confronted, exposed, and held accountable. But the lessons extended far beyond one individual. They were about empowerment, community, and the importance of standing up when authority is misused. And as Jerome set his phone down and looked out the window at Eastwood Estates, he knew that the story wasn't just about the panels anymore. It was about the community itself. Stronger, more vigilant, and united. The days following the confrontation at Eastwood Estates felt different, like the neighborhood had taken a collective deep breath after weeks of tension. The hum of the solar panels, now fully restored and protected, blended with the quiet rustle of leaves, creating a calm that had been absent for far too long. The crisis with Karen Whitman had passed its peak, but the work of restoration, trust building, and reconciliation was just beginning. Jerome walked down the cul-de-sac, nodding at neighbors he passed. Conversations were lighter now, tinged with relief. Children played in yards without fear. Neighbors laughed at small talk on porches, and the overall mood reflected a community reclaiming itself. The immediate danger was gone, but the lessons of the past week lingered, etched into every corner of the neighborhood. Marcy caught up with him, holding a notebook full of plans. "We've got the follow-up sorted," she said. "Neighborhood safety protocols, communication chains, a committee to oversee shared infrastructure. Everyone's willing to participate." Jerome nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "Good. The panels were just the start. The community is the real power. We have to ensure everyone knows their voice matters." At that moment, Mr. Reynolds approached with his teenage daughter in tow. "Jerome, can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked. "Of course," Jerome replied. Mr. Reynolds glanced at his daughter. "She's been intimidated by Karen in the past. Yard inspections, fines, complaints about the smallest things. But after everything that happened, she finally feels safe speaking up. She has something she wants to share." Jerome smiled, crouching slightly to meet the girl's eyes. "Go ahead. This is your moment too." The girl hesitated, then took a deep breath. I wanted to say thank you. Before, I was scared to say anything, but seeing you stand up and the neighbors come together, it made me realize we can make a difference. We don't have to stay silent." Jerome felt a lump in his throat. "That's exactly why we did this. Change starts with people like you, people willing to speak up, to stand together, and to hold each other accountable." Marcy leaned in, her expression softening. "It's moments like this that show the real impact. It's not just about one confrontation. It's about empowerment, about teaching the next generation that they have a voice." Across the street, Karen's house remained quiet. The blinds were drawn, but the aura of unease surrounding her home was palpable. Though she had not yet responded publicly, the neighborhood had already begun to rebuild around her absence from decision-making. Jerome and Marcy decided it was time to formalize the changes. They held the first neighborhood meeting in weeks, bringing together families, retirees, young professionals, and children. Everyone had a voice. Topics ranged from emergency protocols to HOA communication transparency. Jerome facilitated the discussion, ensuring everyone felt heard and valued. First, Jerome began. "We need clear lines of communication. Any issues with shared systems, security, lighting, solar panels, must be reported and addressed transparently. No one person should have unilateral control." A neighbor, Mrs. Patel, nodded. "And we should have rotating oversight. That way,